We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Paul. Paul took some of our regular advice and ordered both the SVS Ultra speakers as well as some of the Ascend Sierra 2 Horizon, plus the Horizon RAL. Is that different? I don't know how to read this sentence. Anyways, so that he could addition them and compare them for himself. So anyways, Ascends and SVS Ultra speakers, okay? He began by setting up his Marantz SR6010 to direct listening mode, and he left the volume dial at the same position for both sets of speakers. Under these conditions, the Ascend sounded crisper and cleaner, but not as big as the SVS Ultras. The Ultras felt fuller and seemed to punch a lot more, which has Paul concerned because the Ascendant speakers cost more and don't have free return shipping. Now we know which one he was hoping to buy. So now he has contacted us to figure out why he is not hearing what he expected to hear. So, is the difference he's describing typical, or is there something he needs to change about the way he's comparing these two sets of speakers? Maybe they need to break in? Okay, you were doing good until that last sentence. You were doing just fine until that last sentence. They don't need to break in. They broke in. They're broken. I mean, they're not broken, but they're broken in. They're fine. What you need to do is level match your speakers, and you haven't done it. You've got two speakers with two different impedance curves, two different sensitivities. They react differently to the same amount of amplifier power. My guess is the Ascend acoustics are slightly less efficient. I don't know if that's true or not. That's my guess. And they are giving you a different volume. You're much more sensitive to volume changes than you are to a lot of other things. So you really need to make sure that your volume changes are the same. How do you do this? You put your speakers in direct mode. You put out, or you don't have to do that. You put the one set of speakers on. You send out the test tones. You level match those speakers so that they are the correct volume, and you could do this on the dial, right? You can say, this is the volume I want to listen at with these speakers, whatever that is. You listen, you put out the test tone, you get the whatever the you might have to put it through a CD or a disc or something like that, or download.
I mean, the test tone directly from the AV receiver should be good enough for this.
But it depends on how he's going to do this, because if these level match, because he's doing speaker A's and speaker B's, and can his receiver individually?
I'm not sure. It sounded like since he's doing left, center, right, that he would have had to swap something out.
That's my guess. Okay,
Yeah.
So if you're doing all that, you're gonna have to do one of two things. So I'll let Rob describe the other one. If you're doing them both at the same time with speaker A, speaker B, you need to change the volume on the knob so that the volume that you're hearing from the speakers is the same volume from both sets of speakers. This happens all the time when you're dealing with headphones. Because headphones, if you're A, B headphones, it's very hard to level match them.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing that you have. There's very few things that you have. I actually have something right now that can do it. But there's very few things that you have that you can level match headphones with. So by doing that, what you need to do is you need to send. Let's say you download a test tone from what's the thing?
Audiocheck.net.
You download a test tone there. You send the test tone out. You say, this is the volume I want to listen at. You put the from something else. You take the test tone. You run it through your speakers. You measure. Then you write that number down. Then you switch to your other speakers. You send the test tone out. You change the volume knob until you get the same reading. And then now you know what your two different settings are. So when you change from speaker to speaker, you need to change from the two different volumes, and then you leave, because right now you don't have your speakers level matched.
And even if it's only 1 or 2 dB on the volume dial, that's a significant difference in this case.
You're very sensitive to that.
Yeah,
You're very
subjectively, we will almost always prefer the louder speaker. Not 100% of the time, but almost always will prefer the slightly louder speaker. I would go further than even just level matching, though, because he asked, is this like kind of typical? And when it comes to the Sierra 2 speakers or the Horizon RAL speaker, your first impression of it is fairly typical. A lot of people show up on a SendZone forum or on other forums and they say, I just got some Sierra 2 speakers and I'm feeling like they're bass shy. I'm feeling like they're not as room filling as my old speakers. I'm feeling like they don't sound as big and as full, which are all things that he described.
Right, right.
And that's quite typical. The Sierra 2s, objectively, compared to some other speakers in similar price categories, they are a little bit bass shy. They don't play tremendously low and they don't play tremendously loud in the bass. They should be crossed over to subwoofers. They absolutely should be. If you want to get full range sound, you should be combining them with subwoofers. And, Paul is, but he's trying to compare these speakers right now. So he just
Right, right.
put it in direct mode. He sent them full range signals, and he's just like, what do they sound like all on their own? Bass can hugely impact our perception of what a speaker sounds like. And really, when we're talking about a system where you are going to have subwoofers handling your bass, we should try to take that out of the equation a little bit, because it will drastically color your evaluation of the speaker. Again, we tend to prefer the speaker that sounds fuller, that has more bass, and the SVS Ultra's bookshelves do have more bass than the Sierra 2s. So I would suggest, when you're doing this sort of comparison, set the speakers to small and actually give them an unusually high crossover frequency. Give them a 200 or a 250 hertz crossover frequency, because they're still going to be playing below that, but cross them over quite high, and that way you're sort of leveling the playing field, at least as far as the bass goes. Now you're really evaluating the mid-range and the treble, and that's what the speaker really has to handle. The bass is going to be handled by your subwoofers. So try to give them a level playing field, and then you might discover, it's not that the SVS Ultras always sound fuller and richer and that type of thing. It's like they were just producing more bass and they were louder. Right? Two things that could easily make you say, I prefer them, even though those things can be equaled by other parts of your system.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he's going to get into this in a second anyway, so I will just go on. So do we, you and I, personally use different settings for or setups for music versus movies? You can already tell that he might appreciate the greater clarity of the Ascend speakers for music, but prefer the fuller sound of the SVS Ultras for movies. What are our thoughts? I don't, and there are people who do, and I don't begrudge them that. That doesn't bother me when I do that. I tend to think that when I hear these systems, the music ones are more colored, meaning that they are. They have some inaccuracies in the sound reproduction that lends itself well to music. And I got no problems with that. If that's what you like to hear, that's fine.
The so-called warmer sound, that type of thing.
Yeah. So what I would do if I were you is listen to these speakers the way that you're doing it right now. You could do the weird thing Rob said too. That's fine. It is weird, but you're not wrong.
I'm just saying, try to give them a level playing field when you're doing a critical evaluation and deciding which one you want to spend your money on, right?
But that's not how I would do it. That's not how I do it. When I'm doing this, I listen to them on their own the way that he's doing it right now, kind of run them full range. I've done this enough where I can realize that, okay, this one has a lot more bass. Right? And you hear that lot more bass, and you recognize it as saying, you have a lot more bass. Unfortunately, I do not need you to have more bass than, than this other one. And then I just listen to him, and yes, I very well make him come to the exact same conclusions that he's coming to right now, that they're a little bit fuller and a little bit, the other ones are a little bit thinner. I often find with speakers that I really end up liking, the first time I hear them, I go, ooh. They just sound so like nothing. They don't sound like anything. It's just like the music coming out. If you hear what I'm saying, that's exactly what you want, right? You don't want to hear the speaker, you want to hear what's coming out of it.
Draw attention to itself in particular.
So what ends up happening is I do that comparison, back forth, and then I go and cross it each one individually, and maybe back and forth if I can. Cross them over to subwoofers and listen to them that way, because that's the way I'm actually going to use them.
Yeah.
You should be listening to. I mean, yes, you need to listen to them by themselves so you get an idea of what the differences inherent are, and do the weird thing Rob said as well, and then listen to them with a subwoofer, because that's the way you're really going to listen to them, and then evaluate them from that point. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. When I did this $1,500 to $2,000 floor standing speaker a shootout many moons ago at my house. The Dolly that's Dolly. No, it wasn't Dolly. It was something else. Anyways, I have to go back and look. Anyways, one of the speakers had a ton of bass.
Mm-hmm.
Had a ton of bass, and I was like, "Oh God, this is going to be a blowout." I mean, clearly people are going to like this bass a lot more. And I had already had people who had reviewed, like I didn't review every single set of these speakers. I had already had people that reviewed those speakers that loved them, wanted to buy them, thought they're the best thing ever. Blind at my house, after being them over and over and over again, for most of the day, everybody agreed that those were fine sounding speakers, but the bass was just awful. It's just too much. Once you compared them back to back long enough, you finally heard that bass, while impressive and certainly interesting, often obscures some of the other sounds that you're no longer hearing. So when you're listening B to the different speakers, you want to hear what you're hearing, but you also want to listen for what you're not hearing. And one speaker is going to give you more information than the other speaker is. Listen for that.
Yeah, but I really dislike evaluating speakers, even if it's not intentional, because of bass, right? Because I'm such a, I guess you could call me a zealot for using multiple subwoofers to handle the bass in your room, that I'm like, evaluating the speaker based on the bass that it produces shouldn't be part of the equation, and that's my opinion. I'm like, just get it out of the equation because it's being handled by a different part of your system. But fair enough.
Why
I mean, if you're,
I do it the same way. I do the same thing, but instead I add the bass in the way it's supposed to be and cross it over.
So just to answer the question, I don't use two different setups. In my mind, sound is sound. And the instructions coming from a recording, whether it's a music recording or a movie recording, really doesn't matter. Those instructions are simply saying, play this note for this long, this loud. And any deviation from that is a form of distortion. So I'm like, there's no reason why when I'm listening to music that I should have instructions that say play this note for this long, for this loud. And I go, but I like speakers that play it a little bit longer and a little bit louder. I'm like, that's not what the instructions said to do. And I like to follow the instructions. So I use the same. I'm like, flat line. There you go.
Yeah. So it is weird though, because I understand, especially people who are. I was having this conversation with my wife the other day. I think I've brought up with the podcast before. People get stuck in their audio tastes at like a very early age, like middle school, early high school, maybe as late as college, but I don't really think so. I think people like middle school is when they start getting locked in it. Some people have been listening to the same thing for just so long.
Yeah, a lot of times you're looking for an emotional reaction, not an objective truth.
Well, not only that, but remember, some of this stuff was recorded a long time ago, and it doesn't sound very good.
Right.
How many times have you been in your home theater and you're like, oh, well, yeah, you know what? I'm going to stream some Pandora while I'm doing something. You put on Pandora, you're like, oh, turn that off. Well, that was awful. What was I thinking, right? You just like, this usually sounds pretty good, right? Doesn't it usually? Yeah, in your car with like a 15 dB noise floor. Yeah, it sounds fine because you can't hear all that. I was just listening today as I was driving home, and there was a clap or some symbol or something like that. I was like, yeah, I'm so glad I'm in this car right now because it sounded so tank, just not even close to real. So yeah, I can understand why people have different systems, but it's really just to cover up, or to, like Rob said, to have emotional response, or to cover up some deficiencies in the recordings of their music, or just because they have preferences in that way. But either way, it's fine. You can do that. I just don't. Neither does Rob. Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.